to get things published for you. Let me go ahead and share off what you should be seeing now, because I believe that I have it fixed. I'm going to share off a window and show you something. Now, when you use that link, you should be looking at a screen that looks like this, without the error that you were seeing before. Basically, again, we only open this up for a very short period of time to allow, folks such as yourselves to go ahead and register for these free practice questions. We don't actually make this public on our website for the entire world, obviously. This is just special access that we're providing here to the folks that are attending with me today and tomorrow. So now if you use that link, and again, that link looks just like this. I'm going to go ahead and copy it over into the chat of ours. One moment. So if you go to this link, we should be able to add to cart, show cart, and at this point, again, you would be registering with your email and password that you'll create. When you register, you're creating your student account as you purchase. As you see, there is no price. It's $0. So when you complete everything, it should, one moment. I'm going to reshare because I'm testing live right now, making sure that it's absolutely working. So what I did is I just went ahead and completed using a test account, completed the purchase. As you can see, I managed to purchase for myself. And you'll get an approved screen, and you can go direct to your resource by simply clicking this button if you wish, which will take you to the student campus. And there you will see your CISA free practice question demo. And you'll be able to start from there. Very good. Okay, so hopefully others will have the same success that I just had. And I already saw some folks coming through. GC, you're very welcome. I apologize for the inconvenience. So, yeah, the rest of you should gain access just as well. And like I said, you can use those practice exams over and over and over again. And what's going to happen is it just gives you a short 25-question exam that's actually a random pull from 200 practice questions. So that means that every time you take it, you might be getting a little bit different tests. Keeps it fun, keeps it interesting, keeps it spicy. So let's go ahead and move on. Continuing on with governance and management of IT. That we're going to run until 2:25 p.m. So it's only about an hour. So we're going to try to rush through it a little bit more. So again, what we're looking at here is IT governance, just like we had to define the, whoops. I need to do a screen refresh. One moment. So IT governance is the process for controlling an organization's IT resources. It including information communication systems and technology, using IT to promote an organization's objectives, enabling business processes. You're seeing that theme again, that ISACA is always wanting to support the organizational goals and objectives. So there are two parts to IT governance. And again, you're going to find, again, going back to that question earlier, Are there other exams that follow this for CISM or CRISC that might be similar to the CISA? Well, it turns out that your CRISC exam has a whole module devoted to governance. Your CISM exam has a whole module devoted to governance. And I'm here to tell you they're all under ISACA, so that means that there's going to be a lot of overlap between them. So this is why you're seeing a lot of the same stuff. They're recycling a lot of these things, actually. So the primary purpose of an effective IT governance is to ensure that IT supports, again, the organization's business plan. That's the most important thing of all. They'll give you examples of good things that IT can accomplish, but remember, the most important, the best answer always goes towards supporting organizational goals and objectives. That is key. IT governance, again, is typically the ultimate accountability responsibility of the board of directors. If we have bad IT management, it's probably because we either required the wrong things of IT management or we weren't watching IT management, and those are governance issues. ISACA really likes the capability maturity model, or the CMM. It's now called capability maturity model integrated, but that's okay. They still go with CMM. Essentially, we're going to discuss this more in depth later when we get into systems infrastructure lifecycle management. No sense in teaching it twice, and it's easier to teach in that particular module. So IT strategic planning, we have an IT strategy committee. ISACA likes to have steering committees, and this is what we're talking about. They call an IT strategy committee. The IT steering committee makes sure that the information systems department is in alignment with corporate goals and objectives. Again, steering committees don't do, they oversee is the idea. Lack of senior management commitment to strategic planning, signified by a lack of an IT steering committee, means what? Well, that you won't have good alignment between technology and corporate goals and objectives. Again, steering committees don't practice IT, they monitor and guide IT. That's why they're called steering committees. They should have formal terms of reference, maintaining minutes of their meetings. Again, IT strategic planning begins by reviewing the business plan that drives the IT strategy plan. So it's a top-down approach. Again, need to make sure that we always support corporate goals and objectives, organizational goals and objectives. You should have long and short-range plans. You see that on your CISSP exam as well. We need to make sure that we have proper resources for short-term planning. Why I would think that proper resource allocation is good for long-term planning too, but I guess they're figuring we'll figure out how to pay for it when we get there. I don't know. So they consider allocation of resources a short-term planning issue. An IT short-range plan should integrate both IT and business personnel. Again, key elements of the key purpose of a job description is it provides and establishes responsibility, accountability for employee actions. We try to manage our internal security with potential problems with our staff through background screening is a good primary control that ISACA likes for this. Again, when it comes to, employment controls, when an employee is terminated from service, ISACA wants to make sure that the employee's logical or technical access should be disabled immediately. I think that's obvious. We want to have, again, potentially good segregation of duties, but also something called mandatory vacation. Mandatory vacation means get out of the shop, so that way I can have somebody else do your job for a while, and if somebody else is doing your job for a while, and there was some kind of corruption involved, it might come out. So forcing vacations puts interruptions into fraudsters' daily routine, and that makes it difficult to continue the fraud. As a fraud examiner, there's a whole class about that I could teach you, for example. IT human resource management, we have other roles, responsibilities to look at for infrastructure operations, data entry, systems administration, security administration. Why do we care? Because remember, ISACA wants you to know about proper segregation of duties. If I program an ATM machine at a bank, I shouldn't have my own bank account at that bank with an ATM card that goes to the machine that I just programmed. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Maybe I could give special privileges to this particular card that I have as a customer. I shouldn't have access as an end user to the very systems I develop and maintain as an IT manager or as an IT staff member. Now, in real life, we find that all the time. Matter of fact, I remember having a head of security for a major bank in UK that was sitting in a class, and he says, we don't even allow our staff to have bank accounts anywhere but our own bank. So I said, so your programmers that program your systems also have end user bank accounts at your bank? He said, of course. Not best practices. So again, ISACA is going to be testing about these things as well. So this is why we need to learn about these different roles, responsibilities, because ISACA is going to have ideas, especially in CISM, about which roles should be segregated from which. IT human resource management, again, segregation of duties, making sure that you primarily review what in order to understand roles, responsibilities, and organizational chart. You look at the organizational chart to understand potential conflicts of interest. So we also look again, this is just exam-y stuff that you memorize for your test, making sure that you have proper segregation of duties restricts a local network administrator from also having programming responsibilities. This is the part where if you're an IT person, such as I have been in the past, you might ask, why? Ours is not to question why. I'm telling you these things that you may argue with and you may say, that's debatable. Well, here's the thing. Debate on your own time somewhere else. I'm going to tell you what ISACA likes on their tests. So regardless of how you feel about some of these things that they say, I'm going to teach you what ISACA finds to be right on exam day. I really dislike teaching this class on occasion because oftentimes there isn't a good technical reason for a particular answer. And I just have to say, but that's ISACA's feelings on the matter. So on exam day, go with it. As an IT person, I don't like that, but it is what it is. So I'm telling you this because if you are substantially experienced and skilled in IT, you may find a lot of IT questions that you don't agree with. Well, I tend to understand. I empathize. I run into this too. Don't worry about it. For exam day, I'm going to show you what you need to know for your test, the way that ISACA likes it. When you take practice questions from me, sometimes you'll see in the practice question explanation. And why this is true, only ISACA and your higher power know why. It's just what it is. By the way, for those of you who have ever studied for this exam, taken the exam, failed the exam, and said, I don't understand why they had these questions don't even have a right answer. It's not you necessarily. It's the test itself is not necessarily, I think, the best effort. And so you will find questions that just don't have a good explanation in this real world. But at least you're in a place right now where I can help you understand what is the right answer on exam day, and let's just keep moving. It's not a great answer, but it is the answer. So IT human resource management, insufficient segregation of duties. These are just examples that you might see on the exam that you need to memorize and memorize and memorize of examples of typical unacceptable conflicts of interest and poor segregation of duties. So let's jump into organizational policies. What do? They provide the scope and direction for security activities within the organization, and it all begins with the adoption of a corporate information security policy statement, meaning a policy, a high-level policy, a function-level policy should always begin with the organization is committed to doing what, to accomplishing what. In other words, this policy is a contract between the organization and itself. This is what it's agreeing to do. And that statement at the very start of the policy is what provides the mandate and the authority for all the remaining clauses. So a high-level policy is not just a procedures list. It is the commitment and the requirement from management as to what they want to have happen. If you want to have an information security function, the information security policy will start off with This organization is committed to establishing proper information security, risk assessment, and related controls for the purposes of fulfilling this compliance requirement, that compliance requirement, and achieving organizational efficiencies, and you make up the rest of the stuff. But you get the idea is that all policies need to start off with what is the organization committed to doing and having and accomplishing with this policy. That's where it starts. So organizational policies should be periodically reviewed by subject matter experts to make sure they're in compliance with legal requirements. That is also true. I explained that when it comes to information security today, if you're a CISO, you're as much a chief compliance officer as you are an information security officer, because a lot, if not most, of what we do in information security today is often to comply with privacy requirements of GDPR and the California Consumer Protection Act and the new Privacy Act in Brazil, and on and on and on and on. So this is why we need to ensure that we constantly review what we're doing with our policies to make sure they stay up to date with compliance requirements. Today, you should have a compliance management system that keeps track of how well your information security management system is aligned to current compliance requirements. The International Organization of Standardization, ISO, if you're overseas, you call it ISO. They have the standard ISO 37301 for establishing a competent and good compliance management system that would actually integrate and keep track of how well your information security management system is fulfilling compliance requirements. They all go together. I teach that stuff too. So let me go back. I'm sorry. So you need to understand, for exam preparation purposes, the difference between strategic level policies, which is the security policy, and then the standards, guidelines, and procedures that we create to fulfill those commitments that we made in that strategic level policy. If management says this organization shall accomplish this and shall do that, great. How do we get there? The how are the standards, guidelines, and procedures. So we then move on to looking at policy components. Let me go ahead and do a quick scan of my rate. Policy components, we have standards. Again, this specifies the technical definition by ISACA specifies the use of specific technologies in a uniform way. It's kind of an older definition, but that's what they're running with. They tend to be compulsory, mandatory, meaning that you can't vary from them. You have to achieve them. We use baselines to develop standards. In other words, we can actually have baselines of minimum requirements established by a regulator that then drives and is reflected in a standard that we create, which will then be supported by guidelines and procedures to achieve that standard to accomplish the policy objective. That's the chain. That's how it all relates. So again, we are looking at a top-down approach to management versus a bottom-up approach. Top-down approach is, again, figuring out where we want to end up. In other words, strategic destinations. That's the development of high-level governance, where we ultimately determine where we want to go and what we want to accomplish at a board level. That then drives sub-policies and standards and guidelines and procedures to fulfill those goals and objectives established for the organization. Again, this top-down approach gives us the advantage that we'll hopefully then have from this top-down approach coming from a common genus. We'll have consistency between our policies across an organization because they were all driven by the same source. Bottom-up approach, this is where we're creating oftentimes procedures as a reaction to a problem to solve the problem. And then we end up realizing, wow, we should have had a requirement for this to begin with. In other words, I'm having the problem drive the procedure, which then drives having a policy that should have mandated it to begin with. That's a bottom-up approach. Typically, we do not find that to be effective in a way to manage things because you end up with a lot of gaps that way. And also, you're not actually addressing issues until you already got hurt once, and that's not nice. But ISACA feels that a bottom-up approach will actually then perhaps be very real life because you're reacting to incidents, only ISACA would advocate this at this point. Maybe it'll change in the upcoming exam change when they finally get around to that. But typically we would like a top-down approach. ISACA says, well, but a bottom-up approach will be very, very real life and be reactive to real-world incidents. Yeah, reactive is the point. When it comes to risk management, we try to manage risk so as not to have incidents to respond to later. And if you fail to manage risk potential today, that means you're not being a risk manager. That means that you're preferring to be a crisis manager later. I tell people when I teach risk management, do we want to be an organization of risk managers or an organization of crisis managers? Because if you don't do risk management, you end up with crisis management. It's one of the two, not neither. So, but I digress into risk management. Risk management founds everything in this. Policy implementation, assimilation of a framework written with the intent of written security policy by users of the system is critical to the successful implementation and maintenance of the security policy. Again, we need to make sure that it's supported by good awareness training because that addresses the issue of security policy awareness. We have manuals, legal banners, things like this, always to support business goals and objectives. Again, risk management provides the basis for security policy decisions because, again, risk management and risk assessment shows you what objectives you need to accomplish in terms of protecting yourself, and that becomes control objectives. So determining what we shall require with our security policies is often based upon risk assessment, risk management. So IT security policies, again, it tends to be more procedural, control objective oriented rather than control oriented. Again, control objectives were determined by risk assessments. Those control objectives are then used to drive the level of controls, the extent of controls that we implement in order to achieve that control objective that was determined by a risk assessment. So, again, this goes back to the need for incident response relating to suspected intrusions. By the way, you're going to find, if you are able to join me for that session on Thursday and Friday for the NIST cybersecurity framework, it also follows a risk-based approach. And I'm sorry for digressing, but I'm just going to show you the parallels here real quick. The NIST cybersecurity framework has basically a continuum of phases. It says you need to identify what it is you need to protect. You need to determine how it's at risk and protect it. So identify, then protect. And when protecting didn't work so well and you had an incident anyway, you need to be able to detect that incident, identify, protect, detect. And if you detect an incident, you need to respond to it, identify, protect, detect, respond. And then finally, after you've initially responded to an incident, you need to be able to then recover back to where you were before the incident happened. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Hey, that kind of overlaps with this. I know, doesn't it then? So by the way, that framework also advocates that you determine what your objectives are first in the identify phase. That class, by the way, that I'm going to be teaching on Thursday and Friday, unlike the CISA, CISM, and C-Risk, where I'm teaching you things and saying why they believe this to be true, only ISACA and the higher power knows. Teaching according to that NIST CSF framework, that is a sweet piece of work. It is solid and will be extremely practical for you if you're able to attend with them. That'll be a nice one. And also I have another little bit of a secret for you there as well. Don't tell anybody. It's just between us. But actually, as a promotion, I think what we're going to do is instead of just some practice questions, I think Certified Information Security is actually chipping in to provide for the full course training, not just the 8 hours of training, but the full course training, at least on the online on-demand for the people who attend that class. I don't know if they'll be doing that on future sessions, but if you can make it to that one, you're going to get a lot of access to free resource that will complement what you're doing here. So that's the tie-in. So IT security procedures. Security control practices or mechanisms for mitigating risk, social engineering. What vulnerability does it exploit? That people make judgment errors. This is just exam-y type stuff that you'll need to memorize for your tests. IT outsourcing. An advantage of it is we get good expertise obtained from the outside, more than what we already had on the inside, for example. And basically the idea is that if we do outsource IT services, who is responsible for monitoring that outsourcing? That would be the IT management. So third-party services, examples of third-party services would include perhaps internet service providers that we contract with, cloud providers that we